Let's remember that Nico Iamaleava has just started 6 games, that he's a redshirt freshman, and Caleb and I both thought he would come out of the chute and do well. I don't think there's any debating that, Caleb. But now, given what we've seen and the fact that we know that Nico didn't play incredibly well last week, which I think we would all agree on. So my thinking is, because he looked befuddled, because he looked lost at times, it is time to make things a little bit more simple. Now, I've talked to some people in the know, and I think there are a lot of bad mistakes by everybody on the offense, Nico included. I think guys ran the wrong routes from people I've talked to. I think that obviously the offensive tackles were poor to quite poor. But here's what I'm saying to make things easier. So they did this with Heath Schuler. We talked about it briefly yesterday, but it worked. And that is when you hit your back foot, and Heath grew into the offense. He wasn't always like this, but when you hit your back foot, if the receiver's open, throw it. If not, run. And I believe this would do a couple of things, Caleb. Number one, it would attack the middle of the field, because right now Tennessee's not attacking the middle of the field via the pass at all. It would also, you have 2 situations that you could potentially run against. So let's say that the defense is playing a deep zone, because primarily defensive teams coming at Tennessee have done one of 2 things, and that's to play deep quarters and allow things to happen underneath. It's especially the case with some of the lesser opponents, or Oklahoma and Arkansas took it a step further and brought in a very aggressive blitz package. So if you're in the deep covers, then you're still going to pick up 5-6 yards before the defensive backs can close on you if that first receiver's not open. If they're in man, they have to watch their man. So you have a potential for a really big scramble and a really big pickup. Caleb, I know this is super simplifying, and maybe I'm overreacting to one bad game. So I just want to ask you, what is your initial take? And then we'll address the poll question, which is in the same regard. But what do you think of my idea? And I'm going to make one more argument before you jump in there and probably call me an idiot. But my one other argument is I still believe that Nico Iamaleava is an elite talent, both running the football, even though he looked unsure against Arkansas, and throwing the football, even though he threw a couple of picks against NC State. I still think he's an elite talent. I think this team is not consistent enough around him for him to showcase that. So what do you think of my plant, throw, or go?
Yeah, I actually do really significantly disagree with you. And the biggest reason I disagree with you is because, well, it's twofold. One, to have that first read and run, you kind of need to bank on the idea that your tackles can maintain their blocks. Otherwise, you will get sacked more times than not. Heath Schuler had much better tackles than Nico Iamaleava has at this moment when they did that with him.
Hold on, let me stop you there. I'm not talking about rolling out necessarily. I mean, this could be in between the A or B gap. I'm not I mean, the tackles are getting beat. I think this is more of a direct run if it's there. He did that once against Arkansas. I believe that the run was still there. That might have been Oklahoma, where it was just an easy 6 yards to pick up, and he did it. So that I'm not talking about scrambling out like Taylor Green did last week.
Well, see, I think you would only get away with this one game, and then defense would adjust.
I agree.
And
no, I totally agree. But I think this is the week to do it, because it would surprise Florida, and you're going to have to do something else the following week against Alabama. You and I are in total agreement. This is not a long-term fix for me.
Okay, but see, I would save it for Alabama, because I think Tennessee can beat Florida. Despite what happened last week, I think Tennessee can beat Florida without doing that. I think they can just run it down Florida's throat with Dylan Sampson the whole game. And so there's the issue that you're only going to get away with it one game. Two, Nico's not as good of a runner as Heath Schuler was, or as Hendon Hooker was, or as a lot of other quarterbacks were. He's an awkward runner. He's meant to stay in the pocket. And 3, I would argue that I'm going to stick with this. His arm is too good. He can make any throw. It's just I think he's too late getting rid of the ball. I think he's missing some guys open. He's not seeing them when he should. But at the same time, I think you simplify the route concepts. I think there's throws Nico can make. I think Josh Heupel's not being aggressive enough with him. I'll just say that. I don't think Josh Heupel is using Nico enough to take enough shots.
Well, I don't think they're throwing over the middle enough, and that's part of the problem. And I don't know if he's protecting Nico because that's where bad stuff happens, over the middle. You throw it over the middle, it's likely to get tipped. More interceptions happen over the middle. We saw that with Nico against NC State when he threw an interception into coverage. Now, we've discussed that maybe Brew McCoy led up, but still, this is a team that's going to have to win with defense for the foreseeable future. And that may all change on Saturday, but they're going to have to win with defense. And that being the case, if you can just move the chains, convert some first downs. I'm not talking about turning him into Tommy Frazier, Caleb, but I think you're undervaluing that he is a good runner when he feels comfortable in the game. He was a good runner earlier this year. Again, lesser opponents, but he was not comfortable. So against Arkansas, anything that you want to pick out that he didn't do well is partially because he wasn't comfortable with the game plan, whether it's running, passing, or whatever.
All right, so I got a question for you.
Wait on me.
And this is an interesting one. My brother texted me this, and I never thought about this until he texted it to me. Do you think part of the problem is Josh Heupel doesn't know how to coach with an elite defense? And he's a little bit like he's not sure what he wants to do offensively because he could play a lot more ball control than he has in the past, and he's not fully committed to his style?
I can't say that because I thought he did a great job in the Oklahoma game. So
yeah,
if you have an issue again, then the Oklahoma game was the anomaly, right? And your brother has a good point. But right now, it's 50-50 to me. So, Caleb, what would you do to fix Nico, if not simplify things? Today's tough question brought to you by Banks & Jones, the show represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com. Go ahead and click that like button, please. If you don't mind, would greatly appreciate that. Make sure you've got your notifications on. I'm assuming you're subscribed because we've got all kinds of special things coming down the road. So what would you do, Caleb? Would you simplify things? Would you make things easier? Today's tough question brought to you by Banks & Jones. Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. banksandjones.com. All right, what would you do? How would you tweak the offense, if at all, to get Nico more comfortable?
I would just keep airing it out over the middle. I would get aggressive. I'd get absolutely aggressive. I would reverse what Josh Heupel's been doing. I would pass to set up the run, and I would make the secondary work for it. I think if you keep doing it, some deep shots are bound to hit. And I think once that happens, you'll start to scare a lot of other teams. I'd be throwing over the middle a lot more, and I wouldn't even care about interceptions. I would just constantly do it. And I'd be willing to bet that if you keep doing it, Nico's going to hit some. You're going to get his confidence up if you do that, because he's going to hit some passes. And so I would I'm not even kidding. I would Mike Leach level. I would Steve Spurrier level throw the ball in the 90s. I would just air it out everywhere. And I know that
to be able to protect at tackle. You know that, and I know that.
Yes, you do. But also the one good thing about tackles messing up plays is because the interior line is blocking so well, you can step to the right spot in the pocket to make the throws. So I would just coach this week all the time, Nico stepping up to the right side, and I guess that would be the A gap, right? And or B gap, and making the throw that way. And I would coach him like, all right, you got 3 seconds after you step up. Once you step up, if you get another 3 seconds, somebody's open. And I would just run that system, and I'd run crosses constantly over the middle because, by the way, plenty of those were open on Saturday. Nico just couldn't see him because he kept having to roll out. So what I would actually do more than anything, I'd get rid of the option routes for receivers. I would just design the routes. No more option routes. This is where they're going.
Now, whether one of us may be right, one may not. Okay. But we're both saying make things easier on Nico, right? No option routes. Yeah. I say run with Nico more often when things aren't there in the past. Tell him to be more aggressive with his legs. Either way, is it disappointing that we're having this conversation at all?
It's absolutely disappointing that we're having this conversation. It's disappointing for Tennessee. It's a red flag for Tennessee. I don't know where the issue is. And that, I think that's the worst part. Well, we know because like the whole unit was struggling. We're talking about receivers running wrong routes, offensive linemen missing blocks, Nico not making the right throw. Well, geez, where do they have talent then? I mean, they have 5 and 4 star receivers all over the field. We believed in these guys. We thought receiver was going to be one of their strongest units. How are they struggling on this front?
I don't know, but they are. And going back and looking at it, I thought Squirrel White ran a really bad route over the middle. So maybe they don't trust their slot receivers or other guys to run crisp routes over the middle. You certainly hope that's not the case.